American Airlines Flight 1447, Seconds from Disaster, expanded. It began as an ordinary flight on an ordinary spring afternoon, the kind of day when city skylines look forgiving and people move through airports with familiar rituals. A last-minute coffee, a brisk hug at the gate, a child's toy tucked into a carry-on. American Airlines Flight 1447, a well-maintained mid-life Boeing 737, readied for departure at Newark. There were 118 passengers and 6 crew members aboard, business travelers with laptops, a young couple returning from a weekend away, an elderly man clutching a dog-eared photograph, a teenage girl in a college sweatshirt, and families returning home. The crew captain, Ellen Rodriguez, had the kind of calm presence people trust without thinking. She'd been flying nearly 2 decades, more than 12,000 hours logged, and carried quiet confidence earned by routine and countless unpredictable days. Her voice was low and steady. She read checklists like a ritual and treated every system enunciator like a conversation partner. Respectful, never dismissive. First Officer Mark Ellison was younger but sharp, a meticulous thinker who loved system diagrams and flowcharts. He'd been with Ellen through simulator sessions and emergency drills. Their rapport was efficient and warm, the comfortable shorthand of professionals who'd flown together enough to anticipate each other's moves. The cabin crew, 3 flight attendants led by senior purser Tanya Morales, were experienced and pragmatic. Tanya had a laugh that cut tension and a hands-on ethic. She'd been an EMT before joining aviation, and the seat of her training showed when passengers scanned her for signs of calm. The flight, 1447, climbed smoothly and leveled off. Remnants of ground chatter faded into the hum of cruise. People dozed, scrolled phones, watched the patchwork of clouds below. Overhead, a maintenance sticker inside the cockpit noted a routine borescope inspection done 2 months prior. Nothing flagged. The aircraft had passed all scheduled checks. It was, by every paper metric, airworthy. At 18,500 feet, as the sky settled into a quiet blue, a sudden, metallic bang like a dropped toolbox echoed through the airframe. It was not a faint noise. It was violent enough to silence conversations and send cups rattling. The right side of the aircraft shuddered. Overhead, bins popped open with a hollow crack, the flight deck filled with rapid, clipped words. "Left bank," Mark called. Ellen's hand grazed the throttles. The master caution illuminated, then the master warning, red. The cockpit filled with an acrid smell and a high-pitched whine that whispered of failing bearings and screaming metal. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. American 1447, engine failure, descending, request vectors." Ellen reported to ATC with a voice that was calm because it had to be. Her fingers moved through emergency flows with practiced precision. Engine shut down, fire handle armed, fuel cut off. Systems she'd trained on for hours became the tools of survival. Inside the cabin, passengers were jolted awake. Oxygen masks dropped briefly as the cabin altitude crept. A woman gripped her husband's sleeve. A child's whimper rose and fell. Tanya and her team moved like a practiced ballet, instructing, reassuring, checking for blood, fire, or smoke. Tanya's EMT instincts took over. She scanned faces for pallor and confusion, prioritizing the immobile and those coughing thick soot. One passenger, a retired machinist named Joseph, pressed his palm to the bulkhead and swore he'd felt something fly past the window. A teenage engineering student peered toward the wing and whispered into his phone voice memo. Something went through the fuselage. In the cabin, resources were improvised. Fire extinguishers barked dry chemical into recirculating smoke. Flashlights were passed, and a young passenger with training in CPR offered his hands to help in case they were needed. The descent and decision damage assessment in the flight deck painted a harsh picture. Fragments from a turbine disc had exited the engine cowling, punctured the hydraulic lines, and perforated an auxiliary fuel line. The right engine was a shredded husk. The left engine held, but one working engine at cruising weight was not a comfortable thought. Hydraulic pressure was compromised. Some flight control modes degraded. The flight control computers flagged secondary warnings. Asymmetry, degraded anti-skid. Ellen and Mark set up an immediate diversion to Philadelphia International, closest with suitable runways, emergency services, and instrument approaches. They briefed the cabin. We're diverting. Please stay calm. Follow crew instructions. The flight attendant's clear, steady commands translated to trust in the cabin. Passengers, though terrified, listened. The descent was turbulent. The weather had closed in, with fast-moving bands of clouds and a stiff crosswind at the surface. Each gust shouted at the airframe. Every warning annunciator in the cockpit had a voice now. The remaining engine began running hot as the pilots managed asymmetric thrust and electrical loads. Fuel balancing became a priority. A wrong crossfeed could cause an engine flameout. At 2,000 feet, with the field ahead and only one properly functioning hydraulic channel, Ellen knew they had one shot to make a stable approach. Simulators repeat the phrase, stabilized approach, until it's muscle memory. It was now a line between life and chaos. The landing. The approach was tense and surgical. The airspeed fluctuated in the gusts. The runway loomed through low cloud and a sheen of rain. Ellen flew. Mark called airspeeds and checklists. The pilots manually retrimmed as autopilot behavior was unreliable with hydraulic degradation. The touchdown was firm, harder than normal, and sparks flared as the weakened right main scraped slightly more than it should. Tires smoked. The anti-skid system, partly compromised, fought to maintain directional control. Brakes were applied with deliberate force. Reverse thrust on the working engine gave what it could. Emergency vehicles fell in around the rolling fuselage like obedient sentries. The aircraft finally came to a stop just short of a runway intersection. The right main gear had taken the brunt, but had held. For a long moment, silence spread across the cabin. Stunned, incredulous relief. Then applause, tears, and the low cathartic sobs of a closed escape. Tanya and her crew stood on the aisles like anchors, guiding a shaken, grateful group toward the exits when the captain declared the threat contained. No fatalities. A handful of passengers and 2 flight attendants were taken to awaiting ambulances for smoke inhalation and minor injuries. The investigation. In the days that followed, the National Transportation Safety Board-style investigation dug into every bolt and file. Evidence showed a stress fracture developed slowly in the turbine disc of the right engine. Microscopic cracks, perhaps initiated during manufacture or an earlier maintenance cycle, propagated under cyclic fatigue until a single rotation caused catastrophic separation. Fragments, uncontained engine debris, punctured lines and fairings, accounting for the rapid loss of hydraulics and fuel. Maintenance logs were audited. The airline's scheduled borescope inspections were examined, and the vendor's methods scrutinized. Investigators found no blatant negligence. Instead, they uncovered a chain of small gaps, a slightly late inspection, ambiguous interpretation of hairline anomalies in images, and the thin, random cruelty of metal fatigue. Recommendations flowed: improved inspection techniques, revised intervals for parts susceptible to fatigue, and enhanced training for technicians interpreting borescope imagery. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder became daily textbooks. Ellen's measured commands and the crew's callouts were reviewed in safety seminars. "We've got one shot at this. Let's bring them home." Ellen's voice resonated in training rooms nationwide. Her decision to divert quickly, to prioritize a steady approach, and her insistence on manual control where automation was unreliable were held up as examples of sound judgment. The aftermath American Airlines implemented immediate, targeted inspections across its fleet and worked with the engine manufacturer to inspect and, when necessary, replace turbine discs of similar production batches. The incident prompted a joint industry working group that standardized borescope interpretation guidelines and funded improved non-destructive testing research. For those on board, life rippled differently afterward. The young couple who'd been returning home to announce a pregnancy did so in a hospital hallway with a nurse who had been a passenger in seat 12C. Joseph, the machinist, spent evenings writing a short essay about how his life intersected with other lives that day. It found its way into local newspapers. Some passengers struggled unexpectedly, anxiety on future flights, a renewed gratitude for small acts. Others, including several technicians who reviewed the investigation, dedicated themselves to preventing such an event from repeating. Captain Rodriguez, Mark, and the cabin crew received commendations. Yet the formal accolades mattered less to them than the chorus of heartfelt notes and quiet thanks from people who'd lived through it. Ellen returned to the line with a renewed focus on training and mentoring younger crews, carrying with her an anecdote that was less about heroics and more about the thickness of preparation and the value of teamwork. Legacy Flight 1447 became a case study in aviation safety culture, a reminder that catastrophic outcomes often follow the accumulation of small, ordinary failures, and that the best defense is layered: human expertise, procedural rigor, technological checks, and a culture that questions every gray area. In classrooms and simulators, the phrase "seconds from disaster" is taught not as a thrill, but a sober reminder. When systems fail, people and procedures determine the outcome. The changes that followed, improved inspections, better training, new parts tracking methods, were quiet victories in a field that measures success by the absence of headlines. Months later, a plaque at Philadelphia's Emergency Operations Center bore the names of the first responders who stood ready that day. The plaque carried a simple inscription: for readiness, for courage, for life saved. Pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, and passengers carried the memory of Flight 1447 forward. An event that showed how preparation, calm decision-making, and a community's response could turn the edge of tragedy into an account of survival.